So the stock market has lost more than $5 trillion since its all-time peak, which was achieved roughly a month ago to the day that this video was uploaded. Asset markets are a forward-looking indication of investors' predictions of what the future will look like, and right now, those predictions are bleak. We have been talking about the everything bubble for a long time now. Everything from stocks to real estate to precious metals and even really dumb shit like meme coins have experienced massive price increases fueled primarily by wealthy speculators that are running out of things to invest in. If you are looking for something that could potentially come along and pop this bubble, then take your pick. Trade wars, actual wars, household debt, national debt, massive layoffs, government programs being cut, and the biggest problem of all, which is that nobody knows what the f is going on anymore.
$4 trillion of market value since its all-time high less than a month ago. I'm talking on February the 19th.
An additional 25% tariff to 50% on steel and aluminum coming into the U.S.
Up to $400,000 each and every single day.
Federal judge is allowing President Trump's mass layoffs to press forward while legal proceedings continue.
After tariffs hit imports from Canada and Mexico, President Trump now reversing his decision.
President Trump walks back tariffs on most products from Mexico and Canada again.
Money loves certainty. Business leaders and investors need to make decisions based on reasonable assumptions about what the future is going to look like. Every decision a business makes, from hiring or firing staff, building a warehouse, launching a new product, to paying a dividend, inevitably involves someone making an educated guess about the next quarter, the next year, and for some optimistic CEOs, the next decade. Now, sometimes those guesses are wrong, sometimes they are right, and good business managers should have a backup plan. If nobody has any idea what the next week, let alone the next decade is going to look like, the only responsible decision is to play it as safe as possible. For businesses, playing it safe means reducing expenses, halting new untested products, and stockpiling as much cash as possible to keep the business solvent for any eventuality. For active investors, playing it safe means liquidating their positions and moving into safe assets until they can properly analyze the market again. Right now in America, even hedge funds, which typically do better during periods of increased market volatility, are sitting out the craziness. A report by the Financial Times found that across the industry, these investors are pulling back on leverage and reducing their exposure to the markets even when, theoretically, these are the times when they are most likely to outperform and make huge bonuses. The reason for all these trends is the same. Nobody knows what to expect next. So yeah, we gotta talk about these tariffs. A brief recount of these measures so far is this. Before taking office, President Trump kicked things off by announcing 100% tariffs on any country that undermined the USD as a global medium of exchange. 6 days after inauguration, the first wave of new tariffs were placed on Colombia for not accepting deportation flights. 3 days later, 25% tariffs were proposed on Canada and Mexico, with an additional 10% tariff to be placed on Chinese goods on top of the tariffs already paid for those imports. Those were supposed to go in effect on the 4th, but then on the 3rd, they were delayed by 30 days, but only for Canada and Mexico. China's tariffs were put into effect and they hit back with a selection of their own tariffs. A week later, tariffs are announced on steel and aluminum by removing exemptions from tariffs set back in 2018. 3 days later, reciprocal tariffs are announced for countries beyond China, Canada, and Mexico, and warnings are issued that no country will be spared. 2 weeks after that, the Commerce Department is directed to start looking into the viability of copper tariffs. 3 days after that, the 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico went into effect, with some carve-outs for things like energy, which were taxed at 10%. The additional tariff on Chinese imports was also raised from 10% to 20%. All three countries retaliate with tariffs of their own on select American goods. 1 day later, those tariffs are pulled back, but only for US automakers. Then a day after, the tariffs are delayed for everyone once again for another 25 days, but they will go into effect on the 2nd of April. For real this time. To start this week, tariffs were also placed on Australia, the UK, and Europe, with a threatened 200% tariff on wine and champagne after the European Union threatened a 50% tariff on American whiskey in response to America putting 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. By the time you actually watch this video, it's highly likely that these tariffs will either be delayed, escalated, renegotiated, or forgotten about. But that's the story so far. Now, hot take alert. But tariffs, if used correctly, can be useful instruments to encourage local business development, protect American jobs, and maintain strategic industries. But if we are going to get these benefits and minimize the side effects, there needs to be a clear plan implemented over a long enough time to give businesses time to adapt. Now, if you are watching this, you might be starting to think that maybe this is all just reactionary and that there isn't actually a plan behind all these on-again, off-again tariffs. More trade policy changes have been announced in the last 2 months than in the decade that came before. Now, when businesses and investors don't know what to expect next, the only good option they have left is to play it as safe as possible, which is why we have seen such a large sell-off in the last month. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Who cares? You have probably heard the anecdote 100 times. The stock market is not the economy. And these losses will overwhelmingly be felt by people who already have financial security because, well, they own almost all the stocks. If anything, this crash might be a good opportunity to even the financial playing field between existing asset owners and people who work for their money. Right? Wrong. Unfortunately, the stock market is not the economy, until it's the stock market that's doing badly. So it's time to learn how money works to find out what happens to a pump and dump economy when it's all out of pump to give. I want to make it clear that included in the group of people that don't know what is going on right now is you, me, anybody you are going to watch online, corporate executives, and probably even most of the people making the actual decisions. This is a real problem for businesses, because here's the important thing. Even planning for a bad future is better than not being able to plan at all. If tariffs were implemented broadly amongst all of our large trading partners at a high rate of like 25%, that would be bad. It would slow down business, disrupt supply chains, and lead to retaliatory tariffs that make our exports less attractive to global customers. Sure, some of these costs could be passed along to consumers, but I don't know if you have noticed, but most consumers really can't bear any more costs right now. So yeah, this would be bad. But businesses could slowly adapt it by moving supply chains onshore, working out deals with domestic suppliers, and focusing more on selling to the American market. However, businesses don't want to make these massive investments if the rules are just going to change all over again, because then they will have effectively just wasted their money. Car companies are the perfect example of this. They produce very complex end products made of hundreds of components in factories that take years to get online. So unsurprisingly, they aren't really changing anything until they really know what the trade landscape is going to be long term. There are, however, some companies that have ignored this trend, although not exactly for the best reasons. Big retailers like Walmart have significantly increased the amount of inventory they are keeping on hand so that they can keep their shelves stocked more consistently while these trade wars figure themselves out. This might help them outlast their competition by a few weeks, but holding this much inventory is generally bad for business, and there is a limit to how much they can actually keep. Even at their current elevated levels, and even if consumer behavior was totally predictable, their supplies would run out in a little over 4 weeks. The other businesses are mostly tech companies announcing major investments into data centers and energy infrastructure to develop artificial intelligence here in America, and there have been some truly ludicrous numbers being thrown around. Now, spending hundreds of billions of dollars to further accelerate the production of AI slop might not sound like your idea of a great investment. But even if the end product is not ideal, these investments can do a lot of good. All of this infrastructure needs to be constructed by skilled technicians, and even though it feels at least a little bit dystopian that tech companies are onlining their own nuclear power plants to feed their insatiable appetite for energy, that's still going to give jobs to a lot of people in an area that really needs more funding. But here's the thing about big public investment announcements. They're free. The companies making these announcements don't actually have to follow through on them, and in most cases, they don't. Apple recently announced a plan to invest $500 billion here in America, an investment that would also create 20,000 new jobs. This was widely celebrated and supported by politicians who wanted to talk about their business-friendly credentials. But if you've been paying attention, it does sound awfully familiar. Back in 2018, Apple announced a $350 billion investment into the American economy, which would also create 20,000 jobs. 3 years later, after the inauguration of Joe Biden and the news about more regulations on tech monopolies, Apple made another announcement about investing $430 billion in a plan that would, you guessed it, create 20,000 American jobs. Now, Apple is not alone. Most companies do this. Apple is just particularly bad at not even pretending to change their homework a bit. Elon Musk has also built an infamous reputation for overpromising and underdelivering in his business. But love him or hate him, he is basically doing the same thing that every other tech company in America is doing. He is just getting up and announcing it personally. But why do they do this? Well, there are 3 reasons. The first is that it's a great way to get politicians on your side. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle love a good headline they can post about their booming economy, and big investments that create lots of jobs are exciting to most people. It also lets them push back against any of those nasty regulations. If you are the CEO of a company about to catch the attention of the FTC, you can just call up the politician you have on a retainer and say that if a law goes through or your company gets investigated for anti-competitive practices, you may not be able to commit to the big investments you had planned. And wouldn't that just be terrible? These announcements can also be used to secure co-investments from the government or relax regulations to let these businesses make their supposed investments without getting bogged down by pesky red tape. The second reason is that people just forget about it. Not many people are that interested in the budget planning of large companies over the next 5 years, apart from sophisticated investors who won't really care if the company doesn't blow $500 billion on some PR project and just does stock buybacks with that money instead. The third reason is that it pumps up stock values. Regular investors will see a company making a big investment into a hot new industry that signals that A, the company has $500 billion to invest, and B, the company is optimistic enough about its future to use that money. If companies can give the impression of making big investments without needing to put those investments in their financial statements, that's a big win. The expectation of unlimited future growth is why these companies have become so unbelievably valuable over just the last decade. Picking on Apple again, its profits have only increased by 80% over the past decade, but its valuation has increased by over 330%. We spoke about stretched valuations last week, but something I forgot to mention is that this only works if people expect even the biggest companies in the world to keep growing extremely quickly, which is getting harder and harder. So maybe this market crash is at worst correcting investor expectations, or at best a buying opportunity that will let new investors get access at more reasonable prices. But there are some problems with this idea. The first is that buying the dip is just timing the market, which for most investors is a really bad idea. And you don't want to make the plain bagel angry with bad personal financial decisions, do ya? The wider problem, though, is buying the dip with what? Household savings are approaching record lows, and unfortunately, as companies have to answer to their shareholders, they are likely to continue with layoffs to minimize their expenses during the period of uncertainty. And that's to say nothing of the employees that have been laid off from historically stable government jobs. It might be cathartic to watch the net worth of some of the richest people in the world tank with the down market. But even though they are technically more exposed to the market, they will almost certainly be able to survive economic turbulence better than most households. Some, like Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, have slowly been accumulating hundreds of billions of dollars in cash. So yeah, old man Buffett is going to have a great time buying the dip. Everybody else? Probably not so much. Global trade has made the USA incredibly rich, but what is good for America isn't always good for Americans. Globalization has let big businesses pull revenue from global markets. It's giving consumers cheap products subsidized by poverty wages and investors access to foreign capital from around the world. The best part is, all we had to give up in return was stable, productive jobs that previously defined the American middle class. For some reason, some people have decided this wasn't actually a very good deal, and that workers need a way to regain some of the power they once had. It is genuinely a very reasonable idea that has united people on both sides of the political aisle, which is why it's kind of a shame that we are doing it in the stupidest way possible.
I'll be announcing the tariffs on Canada and Mexico for a number of reasons. Number one is the people that have poured into our country so horribly and so much. Number two are the drugs, fentanyl, and everything else that have come into the country. And number three are the massive subsidies that we're giving to Canada and to Mexico in the form of deficits.
Canada will be responding to the U.S. trade action with 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods.
Late last week, President Donald Trump formally announced plans to place broad 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada and increased tariffs on China by an additional 10%. Despite being one of the central focuses of his campaign, this somehow still came as a shock, because most people really were not expecting such a large change to be enacted so quickly. Just 2 days later, though, an agreement was met with both Canada and Mexico to delay these tariffs in exchange for additional border security assistance. This might seem a bit weird to you, because trade policy and border security are normally two separate issues. But according to the initial White House press release announcing these tariffs, they were actually primarily just a negotiating tactic to get Canada and Mexico to cooperate on these issues. So if military personnel forming on our border is all we wanted, it's mission accomplished. Now, no matter what side of the aisle you fall on, and even if these tariffs weren't explicitly meant to protect American jobs, it has started discussions about who really wins from fighting a trade war. If you have been paying any attention to this whole circus, you probably have been told a dozen times that tariffs are just a tax paid by local businesses on imported goods, which will normally just get passed directly along to the consumer. That means they are really just another invisible tax on average American consumers, and therefore this whole thing is just a bit dumb. Now, that's not wrong. It's true that if these tariffs or some other version of them do eventually go into full effect, you are going to pay more for most products. and therefore this whole thing can just be dismissed as the orange man being reckless with the global economy. But hot take alert, there actually is more to this discussion. Even if they don't realize it, anything that both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump can agree on is probably worth looking into a bit more deeply. And if they can resolve 3 big problems, it could be a step in the right direction for most working Americans, even if it's not done for the right reasons. The first big problem is putting the genie back in the bottle. America's biggest source of imports is now Mexico. A combination of tariffs on China and the investments into production facilities down south has just given them the lead, and they are highly dependent on it. According to the global data firm CEPPII and visuals from the Organization of Economic Complexity, we make up 76% of Mexico's exports, which are now mostly cars, car parts, and basic electronics. According to Glassdoor, Ford Motor Company employees in Mexico City are earning between the equivalent of $10,000 for basic line work and $25,000 a year for highly technical production roles. Combined with less strict environmental, safety, and business regulations, it's hard for a unionized plant in America to compete with that. Now, labor costs are only a small part of the total cost of assembling a car. You also have to add the cost of materials and components, the shipping costs, and the amortized expenses of researching, designing, and tooling for a particular model. So this means even small tariffs could make it cheaper to make big items like cars here in America, which would give American workers more negotiating power over pay and benefits. But it needs more time, or else it's just going to hurt everybody. A lot of our imports from Mexico are components that our workers need to do their jobs. A wiring harness is a bunch of cables that connect all the electronic features in your car together. They are an integral part of assembling modern automobiles, and American factories import almost all of them from Mexico. Without this component, local manufacturers can't make cars. So they are just going to accept the tariff and pass the additional costs along to consumers without actually making any additional jobs. This can also let other cars which are not made in America raise their own prices because their competitors will be forced to do the same thing. The thing is, America can make these wiring harnesses here at home, and doing so will create good union jobs for lots of people. But companies can't build a new factory in 30 days. It takes time. Now, this is just one example of one product, but similar problems are playing out in every important dependent business across the country right now. Big, immediate changes like this don't really help anybody. Now, that's just the first reason, and it's only a small part in the bigger problem that workers, businesses, investors, and trade partners just don't know what the is coming next. The idea of winning a trade war really comes down to who is actually going to win. Globalization is an unbelievably complicated issue with thousands of different variables that have all made the world what it is today. The dominance of the US dollar, cultural exchange, digital connectivity, and the end of the Cold War, cross-border intellectual property rights, foreign aid, debt markets, and big international organizations have all shaped our lives. But it's a lot easier to focus on the much more tangible action of global trade, because we can physically see junk get loaded into shipping containers and sailed into our ports. Without accounting for these other variables though, even the most well-thought-out tariffs in history aren't going to do very much to reverse the winners and losers of globalization. So who are they exactly? Several major economies have been able to develop extremely quickly by focusing on producing exports for the global market, the biggest consumer in that market by far being America. Large multinational companies have also benefited from being able to produce their products more cheaply and sell them in multiple markets across the world. And wealthy asset owners have also won because they got to finance this industrial boom, move their capital freely around the world, and benefit from foreign investors pumping up their existing asset markets. The losers have largely been the groups that weren't as globally mobile, so instead of capitalizing on new global markets, they had to compete with them. Smaller local businesses, and of course above all else, unskilled or semi-skilled workers. You probably already have an idea of the people that have been left behind by globalization. Small town communities in the Rust Belt that don't have as many job opportunities, as major employers went out of business or moved jobs elsewhere. Now, I am going to implement a zero tolerance to Zoomer comments policy. But as someone who grew up in and went to college in Ohio, the expectation was that anybody that completed their degree could immediately move out of the state to one of the big cities that had become part of the global economy rather than just the American economy. Now, obviously, I am now just a worthless influencer, so no major loss there. But by losing other educated young workers, these local areas are falling even further behind. And the big global cities that people need to move to aren't exactly winning out of this either. And if they remain the only places where young workers from across America and the rest of the world can get ahead, then it's going to be incredibly hard to fix it. The reason why a finance bro in New York or a tech worker in California can be paid enough to compensate for these spiraling costs is that they are providing a service that can be leveraged across the global market, whereas a factory worker is producing goods that are competing with the global market. So if we reverse course on this whole free trade business, it should reverse course on the winners and losers, right? Well, no. The strangest group of winners and losers has been the American consumer. One of the reasons why we can get away with being so reckless on trade is that everybody wants what America has, and what America has is consumers. There are a lot of us. Even our basic jobs pay well compared to other countries, and we love to buy shit. It might not feel like it, but a lot of the products you buy are a lot cheaper than they used to be. Easy to transport appliances like fridges, TVs, personal electronics, and computers have all become significantly cheaper over time. Part of this can be explained by advances in technology, but a lot of this is down to big global supply chains that have been hyper-optimized to get consumer junk to your doorstep as cheaply and conveniently as possible. The most extreme incarnation of this process has been online retailers like Wish, Shein, and Temu that directly ship consumer junk that almost seems too cheap to be possible, because a lot of the time, it is. The way that these companies have been able to effectively get these goods into the American market is by taking advantage of a small loophole in our trade policy. The de minimis value exemption lets shipments into the US avoid duties, taxes, and tariffs as long as they are worth less than $800. The intention of the law was to let people mail stuff to friends and family without having to deal with the paperwork and expenses of tariffs typically paid by international businesses. But good intentions didn't stop these companies from building their businesses around taking advantage of this simple carve-out. Normally, imports from big manufacturing nations like China are all shipped together as one big order that is then moved to a warehouse and distributed here by American retailers. But by shipping everything one by one, these companies can get their orders under the $800 limit and avoid paying the taxes they really should be. It's much less cost-effective to ship things like this, but the savings on import duties more than make up for it. According to US Customs, they process over 4 million of these packages every single day, with more than half of them originating from China, so it's safe to say this exemption has not really been used as intended. If you don't value your time at all, go to Temu and try to find a product worth more than $800. You probably won't be able to do it, because their business model falls apart if they have to properly compete with retailers like Amazon. Now, this whole game could be considered a win for consumers. If you consider a 2-pack of Bluetooth speakers in the shape of an astronaut for $20 a win. But most consumers can only consume because they are also workers. And for most people, little consumer wins like this are not worth the worker losses they come with. You probably didn't hear as much about it, but in between everything else that was going on, this exemption was also stopped, and a lot of small businesses lost their f***ing mind. This was a blow to the Chinese retailers whose whole business model doesn't really work without this loophole, and dropshippers who couldn't get their products in the same way. But for the average American worker, this is a good thing. If slowing down 1 million packages of consumer junk every day is the price we need to pay for more jobs in America, then it's absolutely worth it. The only question is, will it? American companies like Walmart and Amazon will benefit if this rule is upheld. And yeah, obviously they are far from perfect, but they do at least employ more local workers than Temu. Long term, moving in the direction of fair trade rather than totally free trade means we can regain local jobs and capabilities, but it will be a long-term process. One of the most important details that people overlook when arguing for or against trade protections is that most people these days don't actually work in jobs making stuff. Most of our economy is in the service sector, and thanks to communication technologies, things like entry-level administration, customer service, and IT have been outsourced just as fast as the people who make stuff that can be physically shipped across the world. If our definition of winning is getting American jobs back, there are more effective strategies. As I was writing this, the US Postal Service started processing de minimis packages again, and by the time you are watching this, that could have changed, or there could be totally new policies. And that's the final and most serious problem. To win any war, there needs to be a coherent strategy. Businesses right now don't know what is going to happen next, which is making it really hard to react accordingly. If it's made clear which industries are going to be targeted for onshoring and those industries can provide good jobs, then businesses will either supply them or someone else will. Blanket rules that change day by day means everybody is just going to sit back and wait, which means hiring and investment freezes, which doesn't really help anybody. offshoring, automation, and a shift towards service jobs have all played a part in killing manufacturing jobs. The number of people actually making stuff for a living is down by over a third. In the same time, the workforce as a whole has grown by 50%. Not too long ago, this was actually seen as positive progress. Blue-collar manufacturing jobs are dangerous, harder on your body, and all around seen as inferior to working in a nice air-conditioned office contributing to the all-encompassing service sector. But that's all started to change. People have realized that manufacturing jobs can earn more than white-collar work, and it's become a desirable career all over again. Elections are being won or lost over the promise of creating manufacturing jobs, and billions of dollars are being handed out to companies to make it happen. But the trend is not our friend, and fighting it might end up doing more harm than good. These are still incredibly difficult jobs with a very uncertain future. So why are we all of a sudden yearning for the lines?
Will return significant manufacturing jobs to our country.
All-time record for construction jobs, nearly 800,000 manufacturing jobs, the fastest growth in 40 years.
The robots can work 24/7, and you call it dark factories. It can literally be working without human intervention.
Main focus right now is automation. Automation. We can't have automation.
So the reason that manufacturing jobs have become so desirable all over again is actually pretty simple. In the past, the most reliable opportunity for men without a college degree to earn an income that could support a family was in manufacturing. Fast forward to today, and record numbers of people with a college degree are still struggling to find work. Very few jobs can comfortably support a family by themselves, and areas that do have high-paying jobs are unrealistically expensive to live in. It's made a lot of people realize that maybe the old factory job wasn't so bad. Back in the good old days, the way it worked was that most people in a manufacturing business would work on the factory floor. Above them would be a smaller group of supervisors with practical experience that could make sure everybody was doing their work correctly. And above them, sitting in a separate office, were the college-educated specialists and executives responsible for designing new products and setting the direction of the company. But eventually, we figured out that these jobs up here were way better than these jobs down here. So what if everybody could just do these ones? Globalization, automation, outsourcing, and tech services meant that instead of working on the factory floors ourselves, we could give those jobs to low-paid workers on the other side of the planet and move up into management positions. We made the world our factory floor, and the American workplace became the office overseeing and managing it. This was actually a pretty sweet deal, because, hot take alert, but a lot of our factory jobs kind of suck. If we could work all of the old jobs that the executives used to work, this would have been an incredible opportunity. But of course, it didn't work out like that, for two simple reasons. The first reason is that we found out there isn't actually that much space at the top of the pile. Go back 40 years, and the average office wouldn't know what a culture coordinator, corporate wellness manager, diversity and inclusion officer, social media manager, brand ambassador, or sustainability consultant even was. There are lots of extremely common jobs in modern offices that didn't exist 20 years ago. Part of this is due to technology. You can't coordinate social media if it doesn't exist. But a lot of it has been in response to finding more jobs for people to fill. Regulations, best practices, and modern initiatives have given modern workplaces more boxes to tick, which has meant more people in service jobs. But it means that the average value created by those service jobs has gone down. This white-collar inflation means that today, the people working the jobs back down at the bottom of the pyramid have kept up or exceeded most of the people trying to squeeze in up here. The second issue with making the entire economy white-collar is that eventually the countries that we outsourced the bottom of the services pyramid to wanted to make their own white-collar jobs. For the last 30 years, American companies have outsourced manufacturing to China because it was so cheap. But China has now taken those technical expertise and used it to build their own companies that are just as good, if not better than the American businesses that they have used to do the grunt work for. What this means is that 30 years ago, it was factory workers fighting off global competition for their jobs. Today, it's everybody. The solution is to bring back manufacturing and build the pyramid back up again with a solid foundation. It honestly seems sensible, except for the part where it totally misses the point. Now sit down. What I'm about to say might come as a shock to you, but America is not special. We were not the only country to do the old service job switcheroo. Other advanced economies like those in Europe, Canada, and Australia also outsourced a lot of their manufacturing, and some of them went even harder than we did. Australia, which used to have a large manufacturing industry producing advanced products like automobiles and aircraft, has lost all of its major companies, and according to their own Department of Jobs and Skills, the largest manufacturing industry by employment today is baking. Don't worry, I didn't forget. That video on Australia is coming soon, so subscribe, because that place has some problems. Even the countries that we outsourced to ended up outsourcing. South Korea, Japan, and even China have started to wake up to the problems that they have caused for themselves by outsourcing the jobs that actually make the stuff to the lowest global bidder. And now everybody is in a desperate race to reverse course. Robert Lawrence, a trade and investment professor at Harvard University, recently wrote about this, arguing that this whole reversal was futile at best. Behind the curve, can manufacturing still provide inclusive growth? Looks at how these jobs used to be able to provide a good quality of life to average American families, and how our nostalgia for that time has made us all focus on our jobs instead of the conditions surrounding them. It doesn't matter if you forge engine blocks by hand or file TPS reports in a cubicle. You are still exchanging your time and expertise for a paycheck. The reason that manufacturing jobs look so good by comparison now is down to two important factors. The first big advantage they had was that they remained unionized. In the past, union efforts fought for pay and benefits of workers here at the bottom of the pyramid against the people up here at the top. As the population moved into white-collar jobs in the service sector, we convinced ourselves that we were the management, which is why, with the exception of a few special industries, if you sit behind a computer for a living, you are much less likely to be a part of a union. In just the past 5 years, unions representing auto workers, dock workers, and UPS drivers had negotiated pay and benefits that split opinions across the country because they were so generous it almost seemed greedy. The thing is though, if your income had also kept up with productivity, these would still be lower middle income jobs, and office jobs would pay even better still. The other thing that has made factory jobs seem really attractive all of a sudden is that factories naturally exist in areas that are cheap because of the land that's required to build them. Offices for high-end companies that can afford to pay high-end salaries are almost always in very expensive cities where you need to earn even more to live a comfortable life without 6 roommates. People are naturally much more likely to remember what someone does for a living than what the macroeconomic factors surrounding their employment are. So instead of focusing on making cities affordable, pushing for worker representation, or just offering workplace protections, it's become easier to just talk about bringing back factory jobs. Now, both sides of the aisle are absolutely guilty of pushing this oversimplistic solution, and politicians are making the same promises outside of America too. Tariffs, Build Back Better, the CHIPS Act, bailouts, and massive incentives all have the intention of creating, or at the very least, maintaining manufacturing jobs, but in his book, Lawrence has argued that this is probably just going to backfire and it could actually make a lot of problems worse. These big government programs ultimately amount to giving a lot of money to companies so they can create manufacturing jobs, but not even America can fight the force of the global economy. Instead of making money more inclusive and providing opportunities for semi-skilled workers to keep up, these programs have largely worked to funnel money into the hands of investors and business owners. They also ignore the small problem that people have already moved on. After decades of being told to upskill and go to college, people have upskilled and gone to college. These new projects are struggling to find skilled manufacturing workers to fill these roles, with some businesses resorting to hiring people through skilled worker visas, creating a situation where we have onshored the offshore jobs that were originally onshore. Now, Lawrence's book is written by a Harvard economist for Harvard economists. It's an interesting read that I will definitely leave a link for in the description, but you have been warned it's pretty heavy. Now, the good news amongst all of this is that the solution is simple. The carrot hasn't worked. Businesses have taken these government incentives and handed them to their investors. But there is always the stick. The bad news is that it's incredibly unlikely to happen. So most companies have not been having a great year so far, but none are feeling the pain quite as much as car manufacturers. Of course, Tesla has been getting most of the attention as its stock price has plummeted by more than 50% since its peak late last year. Sales across the world have plummeted, as the brand has become an unintentional political statement. A political statement that doesn't really vibe with the type of people that buy electric cars. But the truth is that most other car companies are happy to let Tesla soak up the headlines, because under the proverbial hood, they have a lot of problems of their own. Major brand bankruptcies are now basically inevitable. Will they, won't they trade wars are crippling supply chains, new manufacturers from China are undercutting global markets, and worst of all, people just simply can't afford to buy cars right now. And in response to this simple financial reality, automakers have responded by making their cars more expensive than ever before.
It's told Honda it wants to call off merger talks. That's according to a Reuters source on Thursday.
Honda, Mitsubishi, and Nissan had been in talks to form a joint holding company, but ultimately they could not agree on terms.
For buyers with limited income or credit scores, Jessica Caldwell of Edmond says more Americans are opting for longer repayment plans.
And finally, Bill, for folks who are really struggling, you know I always say this one, pick up the phone, call your lender, let them know the truth. You're struggling and you need help.
So the simple reality for most people in America is they can't responsibly afford to own a car, but they also can't afford not to own a car. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 built out the American interstate system and decidedly made most cities extremely car-centric. These new highways connected cities, and lobbying from automobile manufacturers pushed local public transport out of the way in favor of car-friendly streets. The adoption of the car also let mostly middle-class white Americans move out of cities and into newly developed single-family suburbs built around independent transportation. According to data from the US Census and the American Public Transport Association, 92% of American households own a car, but only 55% have access to any form of public transportation. And even for those that do, it's not always reliable or practical. Now, this has hurt the finances of a lot of households in truly unprecedented ways over the last 7 decades, but it has been fantastic for business. America has had the world's most valuable car market for most of the last century. Today, we have been overtaken by China, who buys roughly twice as many cars as we do. But they also have almost 5 times as many people, so it's not really fair. We also on average buy much larger and more expensive cars. Even though China buys twice as many vehicles, total market revenue is roughly the same because we spend almost twice as much on every car. A lot of our most popular models are so large that they can't even be sold into other major markets. But automakers don't mind because in the past, they have been able to make so much money from the American market that these vehicles are worth making even if they can't be sold anywhere else. Either by choice or necessity, we Americans are also far more willing to take on debt to purchase a new vehicle, often rolling equity from one vehicle into a down payment for a new vehicle with a new loan. Auto loans are now at a record $1.6 trillion, more than double what they were just a decade ago, back when rates were also a lot lower. So yeah, America has a dangerous obsession with big cars and risky personal debt. I know what you're thinking. That's not exactly groundbreaking journalism. But a unique mix of record-high debt, high interest rates, collapsing secondhand values, high sticker prices, stagnating purchasing power, and uncertain economic conditions might mean that the car market has created its own reckoning. The price of an average new car has increased much faster than average wages. Today, the average car would set you back just under $50,000, which is only $9,000 shy of the average annual salary, before taxes. Buying the car is also just step one. Insurance and maintenance on increasingly technical cars has also become more expensive over time. So, how can people afford to spend their entire income on a car? Well, of course, they can't. According to data from the Fed, over 80% of new vehicle purchases today were done through financing, and dealerships have recognized this as one of their primary profit centers. The average dealership today is more of a loan shop with an occasional side hustle of selling some cars, and over time, they have become increasingly creative with how they will finance a vehicle. In the bad old days, people would just save up and buy a car. And then auto loans became more popular as other costs ate into average household budgets. People still had to put money down, but it was a way to make the car buying process less of an upfront commitment. Today, dealerships will use the equity in a half paid off car as the down payment for the next new car as long as the entire transaction goes through them. This is, or was, incredibly profitable, because it let dealerships make a little bit of margin from the new car sale, the used car trade-in, and the financing. But this financing treadmill has now put the whole market in a very difficult position. Used car prices spiked during the pandemic as supply chain breakdowns caused shortages. This let people trade in their old cars at higher prices to put down payments on more expensive new cars. If you were lucky and had a popular model back then, you might have been able to get more for your 3 to 5 year old car than you had spent on it when it was new. Now, the trade-off was that new cars were hard to buy and often came with dealership markups to account for market pricing. Now, this wasn't a problem back then, but it is a problem now as those cars try to repeat the cycle of rolling debt into new purchases. The average price of a used car has fallen considerably because supplies are no longer a major issue, and budget-conscious used car buyers don't have as much disposable income as they did 3 to 4 years ago with low interest rates and stimulus checks. And if things were looking bad for gas cars, it's significantly worse for EVs, but more on that soon. This means people are still underwater with the cars they have purchased with significant markups back in 2022. Some of these people can't even afford to sell their car without putting their own money down to clear their debt, let alone use the equity in their car to buy a new car. To make matters worse, car companies noticed the markups that customers were willing to pay the dealerships and wanted some of that action for themselves. When it was difficult to get enough components to keep up with demand, car companies started prioritizing higher trim variations of the same model to maximize the revenue on higher margin units. Optional extras like driver aids, sunroofs, heated and cooled seats, better sound systems, and infotainment are all sold at a significant markup from their component costs. In some cars, these components are installed anyway, and the features are just manually disabled for customers who didn't select the optional extra, so manufacturers really liked creating these higher spec vehicles. This trend quickly resulted in the market today where affordable new cars, even from previously economy-focused brands, are all but extinct, and mid-range brands are now marketing themselves as competitors in the much more lucrative luxury market. Now, this is not unique to just the car market. A lot of companies have either gone down market to focus on a growing number of cost-conscious consumers or have taken their entire brand up market. We have mentioned it before, but it's worth repeating, that the wealthiest 10% of households now account for 50% of all the spending done in the economy and are responsible for all of the economic growth. But the thing with the car market, and you are going to have to trust my math on this, but the top 10% of income earners only actually makes up 10% of the population. And even then, not all high-income households are interested in buying premium vehicles. Yes, some high-income earners have car collections, but this is still a very rare minority. As car equity dries up, interest rates have jumped, and new cars have become more expensive, it's become harder for dealerships to get deals done. Now, according to data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, car sales have fallen, but not significantly. We are buying about 1 to 2 million fewer cars every year than we did before the pandemic. Not great, not terrible, right? Well, not exactly. All of these market conditions have combined with one unfortunate reality. Cars are just getting better. According to the S&P Global Mobility Survey, the average age of cars on the road in the US has increased by 3 years in just the last decade. It's increased by 2 years in just the past 4 years alone. This means people aren't buying new cars as often, and vehicle sales have been helped a lot by cars being sold 3 or 4 times over in their life, rather than just once or twice when vehicles don't last as long. New cars might have more features on them that can go wrong, but generally the essential stuff like bodies and drivetrains are far more robust than they have ever been. And yes, I can already hear some of you typing in the comments about Nissan CVTs. There are always bad examples, but generally it's never been a better time to be a used car buyer. The average person will happily deal with some outdated electronics or broken infotainment if they have a reliable form of transportation. This has also encouraged new car buyers to seek out more reliable brands because even though they might have a warranty for the entire length of their ownership, the market perception of reliability can have a big impact on resale price. Companies like Stellantis, which makes Alfa Romeo, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, and Chrysler, have been hit by this from every direction. They played a lot of funny business with financing and dealer markups when they could, and their cars are consistently rated as some of the least reliable on the market. This is also a real problem for their ambitions to make their cars look like a luxury competitor, because when people think of Jeep, they don't think of a luxury SUV. They think of their broke cousin who bought a clapped-out Wrangler off Facebook Marketplace for $2,800 and a lawnmower, as a completely random example. Now, it might almost be satisfying to see bad manufacturers who cut costs and jacked up prices to feel some consequences, but there are some bigger factors at play here that will unfortunately most likely end up hurting regular people who just need a way to get around. Most car companies are not allowed to simply fail. They employ too many people in valuable jobs, and in a lot of countries with large auto industries, they are a significant export staple. Too big to fail is not unique to the car industry, but struggling car makers are often the first sight of bad things coming as they depend on finance, global trade, consumer confidence, labor, and resource prices to all play nice in order to run a profitable car company. We are already seeing governments step in to ease these problems. Nissan is a failing company. Their sales have slumped as their lineup has aged, and brand perception is at an all-time low thanks to a series of very public problems with critical drivetrain components. The problems are also worse than the dismal sales trend alone would suggest because a lot of volume from this brand has come from extremely aggressive financing. Even when everybody else was arguably pushing car financing too far, Nissan stood out as a brand that would write a loan on a new Maxima to basically anybody. The company also made a lot of sales to rental car fleets by offering aggressive bulk purchase discounts on their economy cars. This was a nice way to boost sales at the time. But rental car companies normally only keep their vehicles for 2 to 3 years before dumping them on the used market. This caused resale prices to tank on used Nissans because so many hit the market at the same time. Now, this wouldn't normally be Nissan's problem. However, in an effort to make sales, the company introduced a financing promotion where they would ensure the future value of their cars in certain markets around the world, so they were on the hook to buy their cars back at above value. They got away with this for a while when used car prices were high, but it's a significant hidden liability for a company already struggling with debt. Nissan had effectively gorged itself with short-term wins, and now it's facing complete insolvency. The Japanese government had not so subtly tried to fix these problems by playing matchmaker in a proposed merger between Honda and Nissan. The deal was promoted as a merger of equals, which would create one of the largest manufacturers in the world, but nobody took this seriously. Honda had better sales, better brand perception, they were in a better financial situation, better products, and had better management. It was a merciful way to save thousands of jobs in Japan and across the world. Now, this particular deal fell through, likely signifying the beginning of the end for Nissan, but similar interventions are likely going to become more common as other automakers deal with the same kind of problems. So yeah, dumb companies played stupid games and won stupid prizes, and unfortunately, workers are going to be the ones to feel it the worst. However, hot take alert, but we all share some blame in this as well. Cars are something that you and I, and everybody watching, are terrible at purchasing rationally. Whether we like to admit it or not, we do see the cars that we drive as a reflection of ourselves and the image we want to present to the world. Whether it's an EV to show that your RSUs got paid out, a lifted truck to show the Walmart parking lot who's boss, or a Chrysler Pacifica to show you have given up, cars are inevitably a way to communicate what we are about with total strangers. Even those people who have already left a comment talking about their 1996 Toyota Camry and how it's never going to die have still purchased an image. Their image is pretending to be better than the people who care too much about the car they are driving. Yes, car companies have become really good at taking advantage of human weakness, but we keep on falling for it. Their ads are almost always about how their cars are seen, rather than what they do, and it's all to show potential buyers how they can be seen. But as we are exposed to more advertising and social media where everybody is showing off their best life, this is resulting in some pretty alarming trends. Multiple surveys conducted on US and global car buyers found that Gen Zs, who are currently aged between 13 and 30, are the generation most likely to purchase a luxury car, despite having the lowest overall net worth, lowest incomes, and highest proportional levels of debt. Tragically, a lot of people in this generation are realizing very quickly that they may never be able to achieve financial independence or even financial stability. As a way to compensate for that, they are doing the next best thing, which is buying an expensive car to at least roleplay as people who aren't getting financially fucked from every angle. Now the good news is yes, car companies can use brand perception to sell us on financially irrational purchases, but those same perceptions can come back to hurt them just as fast. So yeah, we gotta talk about Tesla. From its all-time peak, the company has lost more than $500 billion in market capitalization in less than 3 months. Uncertainty around trade wars, competition in global markets from highly competitive Chinese EVs, a general consumer shift back to internal combustion engines, and broader market slowdowns have all hurt the world's most valuable automaker. But let's be honest, whether you love him or hate him, Elon Musk is inextricably linked with the company's brand image. He has gone from someone who could be the sole marketing strategy for the entire company to an individual that is pushing a lot of people who would consider buying an EV away from the brand. Now, other car companies are probably really happy he is getting all of this attention, because even though it's a lot slower, people are pushing back against the idea of owning a car at all. Walkable cities, public transport, shorter commutes, and car sharing have all become much more popular issues across America. And while we have a lot of work to undo 7 decades of car-centric planning, having no car is becoming just as fashionable as having a fancy car. 3 years ago, I made a video about why good company CEOs should not be visionaries. Somehow, that video is more relevant today than it was back then, so go and check it out. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how money works.